One of the real great joys of living here on Sanibel is getting to meet people not just from all over the country, but all over the world. But there does seem to be a special concentration of you all from the upper Midwest. In fact, Minnesota in particular, the land of 10,000 lakes, all of which are iced over this time of the year. It is also, I'm told, the land of Ole and Lena jokes. One day, Ole decides he wants to go fishing. So he heads out and starts to drill a hole in the ice with his auger. Suddenly, he hears a voice. "Ole, there's no fish under the ice." At first, he shrugs it off and continues to drill, but then he hears it again. "Ole!" Maybe he thinks, maybe it's God. "Lord," he says, "is that you?" "No, Ole, it's me, the skating rink manager." Ah, yes, hearing the voice of God. Just what does that mean? There's an old saying that goes something like, if you talk to God, it's called prayer. If God talks to you, it's called schizophrenia. But clearly, over the centuries, many very intelligent and sane people have claimed to hear the voice of God or the voice of Jesus. Maybe not literally, maybe not in audible tones, but nonetheless, many claim to have heard God's call. In some ways, a story like the one we just read from Mark doesn't really help sort things out. It tells of the call of the first disciples. Peter, Andrew, James, and John are all met by Jesus on the shores of Galilee, and they hear his invitation, "Follow me." Had someone been there with a video camera, they would have been able to record it. Jesus' voice would have been captured. Sure, we may think that happened back then when Jesus was walking on the earth. People could literally hear his voice, but it doesn't happen now, does it? Yes, I would suggest it still happens. No doubt it happens every day, every hour, every minute. Somewhere, someone is being called by Christ. Somewhere, someone is hearing God's voice. But more often than not, those who hear Christ's call today, unlike those Galilean fishermen, don't hear it with their ears, rather they hear it in their hearts. The real question isn't, can we hear that voice? The real question is, how do we respond? And there the story of Peter and the others is instructive, is helpful. For when they hear God's voice, they respond. They obey. Of course, to hear God's voice, you need to be listening. To hear God's voice, you need to expect that God might speak. To hear God's voice, you need to pay attention. For many years now, I've had a spiritual director. You may be unfamiliar with the concept, as it's still somewhat uncommon among us Protestants and much more prevalent in Anglican and Catholic circles. Sometimes called a spiritual friend or a spiritual guide, A spiritual director is someone who sits with you and helps you think and talk about your relationship to God. He or she may offer suggestions about how you might pray, how you might meditate, but more often, a good spiritual director simply helps you to take note of God's movement in your life. As two well-known spiritual directors write, Christian spiritual direction is help given by one Christian to another, which enables that person to pay attention to God's personal communication with him or her, and to live out the consequences of that relationship. Spiritual directors can be lay people or clergy. They may or may not have special training. My first spiritual director was a Jesuit priest. Over the years, my directors have included a Unitarian, two Catholic lay women, one of them for 16 years, and currently a Roman Catholic nun named Carol. Recently, I met with Carol and shared with her some of the challenges that I'm facing in my life, shared with her some of the concerns and issues that are high on my list. The details of that list are unimportant for our purposes this morning, but having gone through a whole panoply of concerns, she looked directly at me, right in the eyes, and asked, "So where is God in all of this? Where, John, have you experienced God lately?" I knew she'd ask me that question. Directors often do. Still, I'd been so caught up in all of my stuff that I hadn't really thought about it much. I was so focused on my issues that I had failed to look for the holy. We sat in silence for a bit. And then I remembered something that had happened earlier that morning. How in talking about one of our recently deceased members, I had been moved to tears as I recalled the wonderful way his adult children had cared for him in the last year of his life. In that moment, I had felt the presence of God. In that moment, I had heard the voice of Christ speaking in and through my memory of those adult children who had so preciously honored their father. They're busy professionals. They're scattered around the country. They had given much of their time and other resources as well, I'm sure, to make sure that they were here with their dad, to make sure that one of them could stay by his side during some extremely difficult days and nights. Indeed, as I watched them in action, it had been something of a divine call. For I had heard the voice of God reminding me of the importance of honoring my own mother as she continues to move through the aging process, reminding me of the importance of making sure that I take time to be with her when she needs me. It was as surely the voice of God as those disciples heard the voice of Christ. God speaks to us in so many ways if we will just listen. In November of 2009, God spoke to me through you, this congregation, as you voted to call me as your senior pastor. And 5 years ago today, this very Sunday, the last Sunday in January, I first stepped into this pulpit as your settled pastor. Everything that led up to that day, the interviews and phone conversations, the tours of the island and Shell Point, the one-on-one conversations with members of the search committee like Don Hunter, the one-on-one conversations with past leaders of the congregation, all those interactions were not just part of the process, they were also openings for God's voice, openings for Christ's call. Indeed, my friends, there are such openings all the time. I don't always see them. I don't always hear. I don't always respond. Sometimes I need a nudge from someone like Carol. But God is indeed still speaking again and again and again. And not just to people with REV period in front of their name, but to each of you as well. Another of the real joys of living on an island is being able to see a gorgeous sunrise in the morning and then a lovely sunset at night. How often have you had the experience here on Sanibel of hearing God speak through the yellows and golds and purples and blues as they streak their way across the sky? Perhaps you've heard God's voice while biking along a quiet path, feeling your muscles work, sensing your breath as it goes in and out, grateful for God's gift of life, called to enjoy it and to use it wisely. Or maybe you've been paddling your kayak or canoe and you've witnessed the return of the birds in the evening to their island rookery on Tarpon Bay, a white flock of messengers calling and crying and inviting you to listen to the Holy One. Maybe you've experienced God's voice speaking through the dedication of a volunteer docent or guide working to preserve this island at SCCF or Crow or Ding Darling. Maybe that's God calling you to join the effort to preserve the planet. Or maybe you've heard Christ's voice in the presentations of those who share the joys of shelling at Bailey Matthews, or the wonder of history at the historical village, inviting you to care more deeply about the past and about this precious place. Maybe you've been called by the music at Big Arts or a drama at the community house, called to make your own music. Or maybe God has spoken to you through the kind words of a neighbor, the gentle hug of a friend, the caring manner of a family member, urging you to reach out to the lonely, the sick, or those just in need of a friend. You see, brothers and sisters, God is calling all the time. God is speaking. God is singing all over this island, all around the world, throughout the universe. God is speaking. If we will only listen, we will hear. God's even speaking right here in this sanctuary. Here through sermons and prayers and anthems offered up by two folk who have given of their own time to grace us with flute and piano sounds. That God is speaking through the greeter who said hello to you, through the children who said hello to you. God is speaking in Fellowship Hall through artists who have given of their work to support the preschool. God is speaking through the caring love that goes on every day of the week downstairs in our preschool. God is speaking through the ministrations of our parish nurse who has gone to doctor's appointments with some of you and helped others sort out medications and taken your blood pressure. God is speaking through the sustaining work of so many behind-the-scenes folks, staff and members alike. God is calling through the voices of the children in our playground and the voices of questioners at lectures and in the voices of those who are homebound or hospitalized. And whether you're from Minnesota or Wisconsin or Maryland or Vermont or Germany, whether you live here year-round or 6 months of the year, or you've just dropped in for a brief visit, God is speaking and can be heard if you will only listen and then respond. For the voice of God, the call of Jesus, is not just for fishermen, whether casting through water or drilling through ice. No, the call of God is for each of us and all of us. God is still speaking these centuries later. And God, my friends, is calling every day, calling on you and me to engage in acts of kindness and justice and love. Might we be listening? And when we hear, might we respond? Amen. Sisters and brothers, one of my first spiritual directors, a Catholic laywoman, once said to me, "I don't know why God keeps sending me you Protestant ministers." But I know why. Because we Protestant ministers, like all of us Protestants, all Catholics and Jews and Buddhists and Hindus alike, need to be reminded, prodded, nudged, poked, so that we might listen. Listen for the voice of God. Because, sisters and brothers, God is still speaking. All we need do is listen and respond. Amen.